and who is today is a gentleman by the name of Paul Litherland. He runs an organisation called Surf Online Safe, and he spends a lot of time talking to kids about the dangers of online and the internet, cyberbullying and issues like that. But he comes from a very interesting background, and where that's taken him, let's find out. Good morning to you, Paul.
Hey, Gary. Wonderful to speak to you, and hello to your listeners.
Now, I always do this, really. I mean, you obviously had an upbringing somewhere. What was it like? What can you remember of it?
I was born and raised in the bush, so country boy down in Albany. Loved it down there, great place. So, sort of just a country kid. Spent some time in Collie as well. Came to Perth when we were 13. My father was a police officer as well, so we sort of, mum and dad split when I was quite young. So 13 we came to Perth and lived in the city pretty much most of my life. South of the river, so don't hold that against me.
No, I've never lived south of the river. It'll happen one day, I'm sure. Down in Albany, though, was he a police officer in Albany itself?
Yeah, he was a copper down there.
What was it like, school? Were you good at school? Did you see yourself becoming a police officer at that sort of stage in your life?
No way. My favourite subject was lunch. That was what I was good at. But yeah, I mean, I was okay. I was a middle ground sort of school kid. I mean, academically, I wasn't the brightest kid, but I didn't struggle, which was great. And I didn't ever think of becoming a police officer till I was in my early 20s. So
that's interesting.
Yeah,
a lot of kids follow in their father's footsteps when it comes to policing, but it wasn't something that you saw as an attractive career back as a school kid?
No. Unfortunately, our family sort of suffered quite severely from domestic violence. My father was struggling with demons, and the police agency, I suppose, or the policing in those days was very difficult. There was no real coping mechanisms. There was no really outreach networks, I suppose. It was a very heavy drinking culture. So sadly, that sort of culture came home, and Dad was a very violent man, unfortunately. So we escaped Broome at that stage in 1983, and yeah, I never thought I'd be a copper, mate. I didn't want to be like Dad, but over about 10-year period, I started thinking maybe, you know what, I could have a different go at it. So sort of be a different sort of police officer, and yeah. So
how old were you when you signed up?
24.
24 when you signed up. So you'd had a bit of life experience. What did you get up to in between?
I was actually driving a truck for a small goods company in Spearwood for a number of years. So yeah, I love driving, so it's just something I enjoyed doing. So I had a mate who had a job, so got me a little spot driving a truck, and did it for 6 years, but wanted to look for a job that I suppose had more career development and more of a future.
Without, becoming an amateur psych, because I wouldn't be any good at it. Was there a part of you that sort of wanted to go into the police force to sort of show that you don't have to be the sort of copper that, this is hard to talk about, but your father was, at that time?
Yeah, 100%, mate. And that's one thing that sort of always challenged me, especially with my mum. She was still alive at that stage, and I knew she worried because she saw some pretty terrible stuff, and we all did as a family, and WA Police as an agency sort of let us down a little bit as a family. So sort of pushing into that area was something I never thought I would do, but I just wanted to sort of, I suppose, take a challenge in my own mind and go, you know what, I reckon I can have a better go at it. And 20-year career sort of really sort of developed into that prospect, which was great and something I'm pretty proud of.
And did you see yourselves going into an area of policing specifically, or was it just sign up, do the recruitment process, do the graduation, and then, walk the beat?
Yeah, I was happy to go wherever, mate. I mean, we were speaking off air. I think one of the greatest things about the WA Police in the modern era is the diversity of the job. And if you get sort of tired in one area or not happy with it, you can move on to a different area, and that's why I loved it. So being able to move on to areas such as water police, or you could go to TRG, or you can go to where I ended up with tech crime. It was just something you never thought you'd do.
How did that happen? So from your point of view, because that's something that you mastered and then have turned into, what you do in terms of the community now. So how did it happen for you, tech crime? Because that's definitely, if I was in the police force somewhere, they wouldn't send me.
It's a funny story. I was going to say funny story, Gary, but I mean, it's quite a bad story, but a funny sort of twist. But I was actually run over on the freeway in 2004. I was quite severely injured, almost killed, run over on the freeway by a car.
Deliberately?
No, he was on the phone. I'd stopped to help a motorist who got bogged on the freeway, and
Wow.
this guy looked up, saw brake lights, and swerved, and of course he hit me standing next to the road on the side of the road, and threw me down the freeway, broke my back, and I was in a bad way for a long time, and 6 years of rehabilitation, and eventually, once I got back to work after 3 years part-time, I was deemed non-operational. So I had to find, for want of a better term, a desk to drive. I couldn't no longer be out on the beat. So coincidentally, I had a good mate who was the boss at Tech Crime, and he said, Lithers, we know, I mean, I was a website designer, graphic designer, so I had some good experience in that area. Said, come and help us out at Tech Crime, and ended up there about 3 weeks later and stayed there for 6 years. It was
6
great.
years. Now, just tell us, and people that are listening, what does Tech Crime do?
Basically, Tech Crime, we're dealing with all the online issues where criminality is concerned in WA. So online scams, hacking, romance scams, cyberbullying to a degree, online child exploitation. All those reports would go through their local police stations and get handed to Tech Crime for investigation. So, we were dealing with some pretty serious crimes. The McDonald's scam with people, FBOS machines were being ripped off and all that sort of stuff. So romance scams were pretty big. So all that sort of stuff was coming through our office.
The child exploitation area, obviously, I lose count of how many media releases I see come out from WA Police in relation to that stuff. And it's very disturbing, and I don't think that it's dissipating in any way, shape or form. What's it like getting involved in that area?
Oh, it was difficult, mate. I mean, luckily for us, we were sort of dealing with the introductory side of that. So once we'd identified an offender who might have been grooming children, if we identified a particular offender, that would all be handed over to the online child exploitation unit. But yeah, going through, especially as a dad myself, my boy was only 9 or 10 years of age when I first started at Tech Crime, and seeing some pretty horrific content, images and videos of kids in particular. You could only do that job for a very short period of time because it does impact on you.
Just slightly as a side, one of the first times I would have spoken to you was after the very tragic death of Sophia Rodriguez-Shue, the young girl that was taken into the toilets at the South, I wanted to say South Lake, but the shopping centre down.
Livingston Shopping Centre.
Yeah, Livingston Shopping Centre, and killed. You knew that family?
Yeah. Sophie was at my son's school. We were a very small school, Marta Christie, in Yangebup, and I actually got a phone call from one of the investigators on site that day, and because Sophie was still in school uniform, and he said, "Oh, Paul, your kid goes to Marta Christie, doesn't he?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "This is what's happened," and I knew Sophie. It was a shock. It was a massive shock, and that's where, for me, realistically, Gary, it all started in regards to online protection for kids, is because, Dante Arthurs was an online predator. He was grooming children. He was creating fake accounts on social media, and interacting in their worlds, and I really saw a frustration in regards to how easy it was for online offenders to interact with kids, and more importantly, how the networks, social media in particular, and gaming are allowing that to happen, providing that conduit. And it's a frustration that's continued for pretty much 15, 16 years.
Well, hold that thought, because that's kind of where you end up in terms of what you do now with Surf Online Safe and the work that you do in that. And we're going to come back and talk about how you progressed into that, and, whether you were sad to leave the police service at the time as well. It's 16 past 10. My guest in the studio, my Who Is segment guest, is Paul Litherland. We'll be back soon. And I'm in the studio with Paul Litherland, who runs Surf Online Safe, a former police officer. And before we do move on to Surf Online Safe and how policing sort of took you in that area, you got a bit of a footy prowess there, Paul. I'm just looking through the 2018 assistant coach for the Forward South Fremantle Football Club. You've been involved with East Perth. How did you get into that?
I love my footy, and again, we come back to my praying. I was off work for a bit, so I needed to keep my brain busy. I actually started as a photographer at the East Perth Football Club, just started taking pics and stuff like that,
okay,
and to sort of take my mind off that, and then I got into development squad coaching, the juniors, and then before I know it, was coaching at reserves level, and sort of got an invite down to South Fremantle as a reserves coach for 3 or 4 years down there, and just loved it. I love that that coaching aspect and teaching, especially with juveniles and youth and stuff like that. So yeah, I just love my footy.
And did you play?
No, I did play as a junior right up until I was about 17, 18 years of age. I actually got into hockey for a bit there as well. So, but one of the bigger things being a copper, it was sort of hard to continue your footy career because of shift work and moving around. So so sort of sat on the sidelines.
All right, 2014, you leave the WA Police Service, or Force as it is now, of course.
Mm-hmm.
What was it like making that decision, that break?
Oh, it was a difficult one. One of the big things for the job as a police officer, it's a very secure job. So for about 12 months, I really procrastinated because once you jump, you were done. And especially the big issue for me was being an injured police officer. We don't have compensation. So
back then, yeah.
When if I chose to leave the WA Police, I would therefore be responsible for my own bills and medicals. So my last lot of surgery cost over $100,000. So but again, I looked at wanting to balance that worry and fear with my passion for education, and that passion sort of took over, and I loved it. I haven't missed the police. I miss the mates. I miss the teams, but I don't miss the job. But yeah, it was a big jump.
Okay, so when you make that jump, did you know exactly what you would do? I mean, did you set up the Surf Online Safe program immediately, or?
Sort of sent a bit of a transition, Gary, because I was doing a couple of presentations when I was still a police officer. It then got to the point where I was pretty popular and starting to get a lot of people sort of calling me and saying, come and talk to our school. So I sort of had to make a decision. I couldn't continue doing presentations as a police officer because it was a bit of a conflict of interest. So I took a year off, and I remember saying to my wife, if we can get to 50 schools, I reckon we'll be okay. That'll supplement our income. We'll be okay. And 13 years later, 850 schools, 200 organisations. Here I am talking to you. So it's great.
What's your magic? Because, whether you be a police officer or someone who was in the police force, walking in front of a group of kids and trying to connect like you're not some, and I'm pointing at me here, folks, fuddy-duddy that doesn't really understand technology and, and has pretty strong views on the damage that the internet can do. I'm certainly one of those that have seen a lot of bad things about it. How do you get in front of a group of kids and make that connection?
For me, so much of it's that balance, mate, and the internet's awesome. It's great. It's an amazing tool. It's an amazing invention, just like the motor vehicle. But if we're not going to use it correctly and safely, we're going to get caught out. But so much of, and I'm not going to stand here and say I'm the best cyber safety educator in Australia. There's some amazing people out there, but I believe the reason I'm having the most success I am in this country is because I won't come out and lecture our kids. I won't come out and point the finger and go, what are you doing? I just share with them my experiences, what I saw at 6 years at Tech Crime and what I continue to see now for 14 years working at the coalface of online juvenile crime. And this is the risks, okay? So let's empower you to learn. Let's empower you to assess risk. And it's so important for me to listen to my audiences and engage with them, not only to teach them, but to teach myself where they are, what they're doing, and assess those risks, because this is a journey we're all taking.
We obviously, as parents, going back, you talk a degree about stranger danger, and that generally was people on the street that might walk up to you and say, g'day. Is it the same, or have you had to get more high-tech in how you talk?
No, mate, it's exactly the same analogy. And the environments we're in now, 78% of our year 5s, 6s and 7s, so this is 10-year-olds to 13-year-olds, are interacting with randoms or strangers on online environments, gaming especially. So it's exactly the same tool. If that guy comes up to you in a shopping centre and says hi, and he keeps walking, we can say hi, we can say g'day, no worries, but that's it, that engagement's over. But if that person stops and says, hi, what's your name, where do you live, what school you go to, we should be armed in regards to identifying that suspicious behaviour. And in the real world, we identify that. We have that natural concern, but online, we're not having that. So for me, it's teaching our kids and our teenagers especially to assess those sorts of risks as if they were in the real world, and that's what I'm trying to transition. Let's treat our online world with the same level of respect we do our real world.
I know you go out and speak to schools and you stand in front of a classroom, but should there be something in the curriculum that actually, I'm not sort of diminishing what you do, but actually has a structured system within our school environment to teach them this so that they completely understand it?
Wow, it's
or is it because you talk about real world and the online world, and because the generation now is being brought up, everything, and I mean everything is on there. That's how their lives are run. Do they see the difference between the real and the unreal?
The biggest issue I find, Gary, is the online world, number one, is going way too quick. Okay, so keeping up with it is extremely difficult.
Yep.
So from an educative perspective, you can chuck something into curriculum, but within 6 months, that would have changed, that would have evolved. So keeping up with it is extremely difficult. What we can do is we can introduce certain basic foundations in regards to so much of what I talk about. It's not what we use, it's how we use. So it's shifting the culture of internet use. So getting our kids to assess how they use the internet. So it doesn't matter. And again, I use the car analogy a fair bit. We're going to teach you how to drive appropriately. So it doesn't matter if you're getting a V8 or a four-cylinder. We're going to drive appropriately based on the conditions. So let's do the same in the online world. So, and our governments are doing a great deal of work. eSafety Commission is an amazing organisation who are working well. Federal Police working well. But my biggest concern, mate, is the internet doesn't have borders. So much of the issues we're facing are coming out of networks that are international. And one of the main reasons I left the police is because of that lack of concern by these networks. And we've spoken on air about a website called Omegle in the past. Their tagline is talk to strangers. And it's a video chat service, so you can chat randomly with cam to cam. So that analogy is setting up our kids to fail to a degree. So it's just about giving them those tools to assess.
Because how hard is it to police that? I mean, let's be blunt. You could shut that down, and then something else will start up.
Yep. And mate, and to your listeners and anyone I talk to, everything I discuss comes back to one simple factor. And this sounds naive, and I say a lot of naive things in the vain hope the networks will hear me. It comes down to one word and one word only: volume. There is so much going online. Facebook, 3.9 billion logins per day, yet we still only have 22,000 moderators. How are they going to monitor? And they're only acting on reported issues. Like we see in the media this morning, Sonny Walters, Nathan Wilson, racially vilified. The only reason that's come to light is because it's been reported. How are they supposed to monitor when there's so much going on? And an analogy I use a fair bit is if you go to the AFL Grand Final this year, mate, 110,000 people at that stadium, yet we only had one security guard. Would we accept that in modern society? No. Yet we've allowed this to happen in the online world. So that's my argument. Let's start pushing some pressure to these organisations to say, you start policing your network. This can't just be a victim's issue. This is no longer just a parent's job, a teacher's job, or a user's job. Give us a hand.
And is that because, we talk about the dark web. Is that because most damage that is done is not in the dark web world, it's actually in the area of your Facebooks, your Instagrams, your TikTok, whatever the case may be, in terms of whether it's cyberbullying or whether it's actually exploitation? Is that where it begins?
Yeah, and so much, by the time you get to the dark web, I mean, in reality, that's your high-end offenders, that's your high-techie people who are looking at some pretty horrific stuff. But the vast majority of our victims, are being targeted, and most of our offenders are working primarily within these environments. And these conduits are being created with no rules. And I mean, this building was built or designed by an engineer. It was built by tradies. Okay, you have people in here unless it'd been ticked off. If this place fell down and one of us was killed, someone would go to prison if it was built poorly. But the online world, that ain't happening. So this is where I'm trying to really push that change, and it's difficult, mate. And sometimes, I'll be honest with you, I get overwhelmed. Why? Because I'm just some ex-copper living in little old WA, and it's overwhelming because you're fighting these massive conglomerates. So for me, this is why it's so important to get to our users, to go, you start making the change. because, and this is why I'm proud of my kids, and I've spoken to over half a million students in this state, is you guys, I trust you. Keep making the change, keep making statements, because you're the ones who are going to call it out, and we're finally starting to get there, I reckon.
Are police getting better at tracking the evildoers? Have they become more succinct at the way that they go about it? I mean, the entrapment and so on, that definitely goes on. But
and technology is getting better. But again, as technology is getting better from an investigative point of view, it's also getting better from a criminal perspective. They can hide much easier. So this is where, again, it's very difficult. So, but the benefit we have is, again, so many of the conduits being created, they can provide information, they can provide details which can lead us as police officers to a target or an offender. But again, we're dealing with international organisations who are very reluctant to give that information because they're looking after themselves, or they're protecting their own corporate entity.
Just to finish on, because we are running out of time, did you think you'd be the West Australian of the Year award recipient last year?
No. Yeah, and I mean, accolades are great, mate, but it was pretty overwhelming. It's good to be recognised for the work I'm doing, but I remember sitting there that night with my wife, my son and his partner, and they called my name out, and I had a Senior Australian of the Year, an amazing professor on the table with me, and when they said my name, I said an expletive and I said, "I'm so sorry, Professor." And she goes, "Don't worry about it." And next thing I know, my wife's tugging at my pants. She's going, "You need to get up. You need to get up." So it was completely surreal.
It must, let's cut to the chase. That must give you a lot of satisfaction, though, that in some way what you do, you probably can't see an end to it necessarily, but to be recognised for trying to find an end to it.
And that's what I hang my hat on. And the fact that one of my former students was one of the ones who nominated me, so that I hang my hat on that, because it's about making change, and we are getting there, mate. And like I said, sometimes I feel like it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and it is, but we're getting there. It's not, like I said, it's not only my voice, it's the voice of many other educators around the country who are lifting the lid on how flawed the online world is. So let's continue to really call that out. And if I can get a pat on the back by becoming an Australian of the Year recipient, then I'll take that, because it gives me a higher voice. So
absolutely,
I'll take that on.
Absolutely. Use the platform. Mate, thank you very much for coming in.
Thanks,
and
Gary.
Explaining to our listeners what you do and where you've come from. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for the opportunity to talk, mate. Well done.
That's Paul Litherland there, a former copper, and of course he probably won't thank me for this, but Surf Online Safe is where you can find him in terms of the work he does. He's got no shortage of requests to come out and do what he does best. Thanks very much for his company today. We'll take a break. 133882, of course, is the talkback number. We're